My name is Terry, and my husband Jerry and I have lived in Carson Valley for nearly 34 years now. My face is familiar to a lot of people because I have been a substitute teacher for a long time, swim team coach, soccer team mom, and our two sons were both born and raised here in Douglas County. And I would like to introduce you to my family, especially my youngest son, Nicholas. Were planned. They were wanted. You can see the wonderment in Wade's eyes as he welcomes his little brother home from the hospital. Now, Nicholas is the kind of kid that loved to try new things. This would be a Cookie Monster cupcake from Raley's. He really got into everything he tried. And really and truly, there was hardly a time when he wasn't smiling. He was just that kind of kid. Look at this picture. Now, even if you are not the mom, you look at this bald-headed baby and he's got to make you smile. He was one cute baby, big old grin. Now, Nicholas was always busy. It was pretty hard to get his picture taken because it was hard for him to sit still. He was a pirate long before Johnny Depp. And he and his brother were like best friends. They would actually beg to spend the night with each other in their bedrooms. And this, now we weren't like a rich, fancy family. This was a dining room, and we couldn't afford dining room furniture, so we turned it into a toy room. And they loved to play with each other, even though they were like Mr. Day and Mr. Night. One of the few things that they really agreed on was trying to make Mom go crazy. This would be an effort to get a Christmas card picture. And I finally gave up, and this was the picture I ended up taking. Now, this is a picture of Horseshoe Bend. And that is not like a stream running across here. Oh no, that is nothing but spring runoff. That is the road that we traveled across to get to our picnic site. And this boy, he loved to fish. The family loved the out of doors, and he actually caught that fish in the spring runoff. He loved to go boating. He saved up his money, bought his own boat at age 6, and was a competent rower at age 6 years old. We went one time out to Silver Lake, and out in Silver Lake there's like this rock island, and he actually took his fishing pole over to Dad and had Dad bait it up. And then he put his tackle box in the boat and stuck his fishing pole out the back of the boat. And he just rowed out to this rock island, got out, pulled it up on shore, pulled out his fishing pole, cast it into the water, caught a fish, got back into the boat, and rowed back, age 6. Very competent. He was a natural athlete at everything. He set the record in almost every sport for every length at the Old Town Pool. It was hard for him to pick just one sport. He loved them all. He would be in the outfield trying to catch a fly ball with chlorine-filled eyes. He loved soccer. But football was probably his favorite. And most of the time, whatever sport he was in, he was on a championship team. Now, Nicholas had never been trained in wrestling, but he almost always made it to the final round, no matter what sport he chose. Even though he was very short for his age, he would work very hard, and he did not. When we finally could afford some cement and a basketball backstop, he didn't want it put at a lower height so he could slam dunk and hang on it. He wanted it at regulation height so that he could learn to do it right. And he was so excited when he could finally outshoot his big brother who was tall. Now, jocks kind of get a bad rap sometime about being all macho and everything, but Nicholas, for all the jock that he was, he had a sensitive nature to him, and one of the ways that exemplified that was when he was given an opportunity to choose any kitty out of the litter, he chose the runt. Because he was short for his age, I don't know, but he nurtured that kitty and he loved it. Squirt. Now, Nicholas was a Cub Scout and a daredevil. I only wish that this picture could show the gleam and the enjoyment of the pure devil-may-care, the chill of the adrenaline going down his spine. Now, again, being an outdoors family, the dads in the neighborhood and the kids would all go hunting. And in the little balloon, it says, "Somebody please tell me how I went from manly man with a gun to a mermaid wearing coconuts." Now, years ago, they had a problem-solving competition called Odyssey of the Mind, and I'm not sure if it still goes on in Douglas County, but you were given a problem, you had to solve it, there were lots of pieces to it, strategy, logistics, and part of it had to do with remote control cars and costumes and having a skit at the end. And his team won county and won state and went and represented the state of Nevada in Washington, D.C. Well, anytime you do anything like that in Carson Valley, of course you're on a float in the Carson Valley Days Parade. So it did not bother him to go driving down Main Street wearing coconuts and a wig being a mermaid. He thought that was fun. That's the kind of kid he was. Now, Nicholas went to middle school. At that time, middle school was, 6th grade was at the middle school. And at that time, I happened to be working for the school psychologist, with the naughty children. And it was a little disconcerting when I received a phone call from the vice principal of the middle school. "Terry, I have Nicholas in my office." And she put him on the phone to tell me why. And he gets on the phone and he's like, Mom, you're going to be so proud of me." And I'm thinking, okay, how are they going to put a spin on this one? He's in the vice principal's office. And he says, "Mom, really, you're going to be so proud of me." But I'm going to stop this story right there, and I'm going to back up about, 2 or 3 years when Wade was at the middle school. When Wade was at the middle school, the cool thing was called Flip Up Friday. And on Flip Up Friday, what happened was everybody would go around and flip up each other's shirts. Now, this was fine when boys flipped up boys' shirts and when girls flipped up boys' shirts. But if boys flipped up girls' shirts, it became a problem. And of course, it was one of those things that over time got out of hand and the administration had to squash it. And so actually one boy was arrested. And at that time, sexual harassment wasn't the issue labeled like that. And he was arrested for statutory rape. It was quite serious. And, my boys were mad. They came home and the entire dinner conversation that night was how unfair. Girls can do stuff that boys can't do, and and girls get it so easy, and and we, no matter how we interjected something to have it make sense, they couldn't hear it. So we let them vent, and we had to finally finish the conversation with, "Here's the deal, guys. Life is filled with double standards. Get used to it. You can either work within the system to make it change, or if you choose to not abide by it, then you suffer the consequences." Short and sweet. So now back to Nicholas being in the vice principal's office, and I'm going to be so proud of him. He says, "Mom, the thing today, remember when we had that conversation about Flip Up Friday when Wade was there in middle school? Well, now the really cool thing is we pants each other." So he said, "You're going to be really proud of me because I remembered what you said about how it's okay for, girls to do boys, but boys can't do to girls." And so I was good. All day this girl tried to pants me, and I did not try to pants her back. I held off. I controlled myself. But Mom, 7th period came around, and I was in the school library, and she came by me one more time, and she tried to pants me. And again, I did not try to pants her back. I just showed her what she'd been wanting to see all day. Yeah, I'm so proud. Now, towards the end of middle school and the beginning of high school, Nicholas kind of did this U-turn and went to become a cowboy rather than a jock. And he went to work on a dairy farm. Now, if any of you are familiar with dairy farm work, it's probably some of the hardest work there is. 24 hours a day, a lot of physical labor, and he loved it. He just really enjoyed it, and he worked there from the time he was 15 until he graduated. Now, I show this picture of this old pickup truck. This is a picture actually of Nicholas when he was about 2, so that you can see that I'm not lying about what kind of a pickup truck. We actually let Nicholas have this pickup truck when he turned 16. You can see it's just a regular cab, not a king cab. It is 4-wheel drive, but there's no air conditioning. There was heat, but just your basic utility 4-wheel drive pickup truck. And when he got the pickup truck, he was very happy to have it. He didn't think he was being slighted because he didn't have something new. But the thing is, you know, when girls get something like a car or a desk, you know, we like to nest. We put our makeup in it and our hairbrush in it. And I don't know what most guys do, but Nicholas actually nested this pickup truck. He was working on the dairy, and he went in and he got, in the milking barn, the cows came through, and he actually saw this one cow come through with this turd that had wrapped itself around part of the tail, around the hair, and it was just kind of caught there. And he thought that was probably one of the coolest things he'd ever seen. So he whoops out his pocket knife, hacks it off, and takes it and ties it around the rear view mirror of the truck for the perfect rear view mirror decoration. And then one time they were castrating the bull calves, and he took one of the sacks and thought, this is so cool, and he put it over the gear shift knob so that as the sack dried, it conformed, and he had a custom-made gear shift knob cover. I mean, what can be more cool than that? Now, the thing is, he was on the rodeo team, and we had to drive this pickup truck towing the horse trailer to every little town in Nevada. Boulder City, Caliente, Moapa Valley, Elko, Eureka, all over the state of Nevada. And of course, Nicholas, being the talented one who could back up a horse trailer in and out of every nook and cranny, he drove. Dad got to sit in the passenger seat, which meant Mom got to sit with the turd swinging in front of her face and the gear shift knob cover between her legs. But that's what we moms do for our kids. And Nicholas thought he had the coolest truck ever. Now, he bought his first horse, JR, for only $800, and he bought it with his own money. And if any of you are familiar with how much horses cost, you don't get much of a horse for $800. But he didn't care. He figured, you know what? I can train this horse, and this horse will be fine. And he got JR to perform pretty well, but once his skill really started improving, we did get him a better roping horse. But he was willing to try anything. JR was his pet, turned him into a roping horse, trained him, and he loved that horse. Now, rodeo is the kind of sport that is generational. It is really pretty much passed down from grandpa to dad to kid. Most of the kids are on a ranch where there's chutes where the cattle, the steers, the calves can come out of chutes and you can practice. And Nicholas didn't have that luxury. But you know, it didn't occur to him that he couldn't be competitive. And he actually came in second for the state of Nevada in steer wrestling. Even as a kid, he showed signs of being a businessman. Now, this was a lemonade stand that we had out along Kimmerling before it got very busy. And actually, pretty much the only traffic were Bing's trucks going back and forth in the gravel pit. And those guys actually did stop and get lemonade from these boys. It was pretty great. But the hardest part for Nicholas was having to sit still and wait for somebody to come. He loved the rural work. He had a pig. His pig was Grand Market champion at the Nevada State Fair. His dairy calf that he raised won every category that it was in, best of show. He was highly competitive in showmanship, and he enjoyed it. He went from mowing lawns in the backyard to cutting hay on farm equipment that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. The people who owned the dairy had so much trust and faith in him that they took the first vacation that they'd ever taken in their entire life, and they took 10 days and they left this dairy with this 16-year-old kid in charge for 10 days. That's how much confidence they had in him. Now, Nicholas decided to go to Treasure Valley Community College in Oregon because Nevada's kind of losing its agriculturalness, and Treasure Valley was a really good ag school. A girl gave me this photo out of her college scrapbook, and she had put in, "Worship me and we'll get along just fine." And that sort of sums up Nicholas's attitude with the girls, and they didn't mind it. He was still a water baby and still a cowboy, rodeoed all through college. He was even featured in the Treasure Valley Community College calendar. And again, I wish the pictures could show up better, because the look of confidence and schmaltz on his face, that just epitomizes Nicholas. Again, his sensitive nature. He goes off away to school, so both boys are gone, empty nest, really hard for Dad, because Dad spent so much time with these boys, fishing, hunting, everything. And Nicholas brought home a little yellow lab for him off of one of the dairies up there to keep Dad from being lonely. Now, I'm going to read this to you because I want you to understand that I'm not just a proud mom bragging about her kid. Nick was an excellent student with exceptional skills both in and out of the classroom. While at Treasure Valley Community College, he was involved with the rodeo team and was one of the most motivated and academically talented students that I worked with. In fact, Nick received an award from the Ag Department for being the outstanding freshman student in his first year. Nick excelled in his agricultural classes, was always willing to learn, and was never afraid to ask questions. I feel that Nick was one of the elite students at Treasure Valley Community College. Okay, that would be his instructor. But the department chair said, "Nick is willing to meet people where they are. He's a very resourceful person. He's a get-something-done person and has developed into a great peer leader. He has a smile on his face most of the time." See, I wasn't lying before. "He has a great deal of self-confidence in his ability and work ethic. Nick is one of those individuals that could do about anything he wanted to do, and he would be successful. He is courteous and friendly and has a good sense of humor." Now, he met a cowgirl there, and after they graduated, he proposed and they had a country wedding, and even a little wild fawn came and joined this outdoor country wedding. Now, his wife, Shauna, decided she wanted to go to vet tech school in Denver. And Nicholas is like, "Sure, honey, whatever you want to do, I'll find something," and goes to Denver. This is a Carson Valley boy who used to be afraid to go into Reno because of all the big cityness of it all. And here he is in Denver, and he starts up his own business. He hasn't got family there, he has no networking, and he just figures, I can do that. And this is the kind of work that he did, the decorative concrete, the restoration. And it was quite successful. Nicholas, the son, the brother, the husband, the businessman. And then he met a woman. And then he divorced his wife. And then his behavior changed. And we found out he was using methamphetamine. Why? That's what parents ask themselves. Why? Okay, I can see Ride a bucking bull or a horse? Sure, I can do that. That's Nicholas. Show a pig at a county fair and I don't have a clue what I'm doing? Sure, I can do that. Go down an icy slope over moguls? I can do that. Start up my own business at age 21 and be successful? Sure, I can do that. Try drugs and quit any time? I don't know. For whatever reason, Nicholas tried methamphetamine, whether it was to get that chill down his spine from extreme sports, or whether it was to work longer hours to make more money. I don't know. All I know is that his choosing to use methamphetamine has left us without him. And what did he get from using methamphetamine? A downward spiral spin into the textbook world of methamphetamine. He had the explosive anger that is indicative of using meth, which got him arrested for domestic violence, which got him probation, community service, anger management classes, everything except the root of the problem, the meth use. He became paranoid in 4 short years. He started carrying a pipe with him in his backpack. He lost jobs. He lost his vehicle. He lost his home. He slept from meth friend's house to meth friend's house. There were nights when my son was homeless and slept in the Sparks Marina. He hawked everything he owned except the boxes of childhood memorabilia, the boxes with the scrapbooks that I made for him, and his Pop Warner trophies, and his swim team medals. Now, I would like to think as his mother that he didn't hawk those things because he felt a connection to family and he loved us and those were things he wanted to hang on to. But at that point, I know that's not the case. I'm pretty darn sure the reason he didn't sell them was because nobody wanted him. His brain, the part of his brain that allowed remorse and love with the family, was pretty much destroyed by that point. When we walked into the emergency room, our son was on life support. My son, my vibrant, full of life son that is graduated from college and married and flown the coop and on his own, he's on life support. And I went over to his body and I looked at it. And, he didn't look aged like the shock value meth posters. And he had a couple of meth sores on his arm, but no more than really a couple of mosquito bite looking things. And his teeth were perfect and white. He didn't have rotted and black teeth. He looked just like himself. And then they took us into an intake room. And they told us that they wanted to declare him brain dead. And they wanted to see about donating his organs. And so my husband said, I can't do this. And he left the room, and that was fine. Because he hadn't prepared himself for this moment. And I knew that this was a possibility. But it was surreal. It was like watching CSI or some movie. I mean, this is my son lying there. And so in order to make sure he's brain dead, what they do is they take the tube out. And then you wait. So I watched as they took the tube out. And I saw his chest heave up and heave down with his last breath. But still, we had to stand there and wait for 10 minutes to see if he would breathe again. And he didn't. And that night we went home, and I wasn't able to sleep. And his dad started thrashing in his sleep. And I tried to wake him up, and I couldn't wake him up. And then his dad groaned out, oh my God, they're cutting me open now. Oh my God. And I tried to wake him up, and I couldn't. And then he said, they're taking my lungs out now. I can feel it. Oh my God, it hurts. And he was dreaming that his body parts were being harvested, like Nicholas's. And then we found out that none of Nicholas's body parts could even be used for donation. Nothing was suitable. Here was this near perfect shell with a body full of exploded parts. Now, our son was a financially independent adult. And so as parents, it's really hard to do anything when your son is married and independent. We researched to try to find ways to help him. One of the things that we did was we waited until this new woman was off to work. And we knew he would be home in Sparks, and we drove out there, and we sat around the corner, and we saw him actually walk out to his car, so we knew he was there. And he went back in, and we started calling every 10 to 15 minutes for 3-4 hours. And of course he wouldn't pick up. He knew it was us. And I just hoped that he was listening to the messages. And I would say, Nicholas, we love you. Nicholas, we don't want anything from you. Nicholas, who among the people you are with now can say that? Who doesn't want something from you? Nicholas, let us help you help yourself. And finally we went home. But the next morning he called, and I thought, yes, we did it. We got through to him. And he said, Mom, okay, you want me to see somebody, I'll see somebody. And although things are getting better in the time since then, it's not like on the Dr. Phil show. You can't just waltz into a recovery room and check in. You have to jump through hoops, at least then. And I called all over, trying to find the best way to get him help, and finally got him an appointment at a life stress center. And I called him back and I said, Nicholas, I got you an appointment, and you'll even be able to put in your full day's work, because I knew that was important. Again, wanting to feel like it was important because of his work ethic, of which he'd always been so proud, but knowing probably because he needed the money for his meth. And he said, okay, I'll meet you there. So we drove into Sparks, even though we couldn't have any knowledge of what went on being parents. And he called and said he was going to be late. And I thought, yeah, there we go. That's the typical drug addict behavior. But he did. He showed up. And again, my hopes soared. And he was in for 2 hours. And when he came out, what he told us was that, okay, you know, I told you all along, I just use recreationally. I don't have a problem. The counselor says there's like a scale of 1 to 5, and I'm a 2, so it might be a little bit more than recreational, so I'm just gonna, you know, cut back. And we said, Nicholas, you know, let's talk. Let's go someplace neutral. We'll go to dinner. We'll rent a motel room. Talk to us. Stay with us. Communicate with us. And he wouldn't. He had to go. He had to leave. 9 months later, he was dead. My husband and my son and myself, we're forever affected. It's Christmas. What do I do with his stocking? For 2 years, I kept his birthday present wrapped. I didn't want to unwrap it because I thought, if I unwrap it, it's going to make it real. Because maybe this is just a really bad dream and I'll wake up. And finally, I was ready to unwrap it. I have to keep the ribbons and the tag. It's real. I'm not going to wake up and it's not going to be over. I've lived in Douglas County a long time, and still a lot of people don't know what's happened to Nicholas. And I'll be in the store and people will say, Terry, haven't seen you. How are the boys? And I have to say, well, Wade's fine. Nicholas is dead. I know we were not perfect parents. And I know we were good parents. I actually have a letter that Nicholas wrote telling us how people would come to him in Denver and say, wow, your parents must be really proud of you. You are a fine person, and to be doing this so well, so young, you must have had really good parenting. And how nice to have a son write a letter to you like that. So I know in black and white, straight from Nicholas, that I didn't do anything wrong. But as a mom, you beat yourself up. As a mom, I can think of some little something every day that maybe I should have been more strict, or maybe I wasn't strict enough, or too strict. You beat yourself up. I have to work to know that it was Nicholas's choice. And because of his choice, all we have are a lot of videos and family pictures, and I do cherish those. But I can no longer have this. I can't hold both those boys in my arms at the same time. I have my oldest son, and I love him, and I'm proud of him. But we miss him. Nicholas has left a vacancy in our family. His dad shared everything. He has a new passion. He has scuba diving, and he just wanted to share that with Nicholas so much. I tell this story because I'm hoping that someone will be affected. Someone will identify with Nicholas. Someone will see themselves in Nicholas. And to make people realize that, yes, when you're growing up, your parents say, when you're an adult, you can make your own decisions. But you know what? No matter how old you are, every decision you make has a trickle-down effect on someone else. And Nicholas's choice to use methamphetamine has left a huge hole in my heart. And even if you sit there and you say, well, nobody cares about me, I'm all alone, there is somebody somewhere where you're going to affect them, either negatively or positively. If you choose, when the choice is offered to you, to use a drug, you're hurting your family. You could be hurting someone on the street. I thank God that I lost Nicholas before he resorted to crime, and before he killed somebody driving under the influence, or before he pulled that weapon he used to carry and beat somebody up. I don't think I could have lived with that. But a positive choice, if you make a positive choice to say no, or make a positive choice to say, I have a problem, the ripple effect is huge. And if I thought that I could have some sort of effect by telling this story, to have somebody make a positive choice, the ripple effect to me would be huge. Please, say no to drugs. Make good choices on everything. Thank you.
Many thanks, everybody. Just for the record, my name is indeed Bert Bedeau, and I am an employee of the Department of Cultural Affairs. The official title of my institution is the Comstock History Center. I also run the Comstock Historic District Commission, and everybody in Virginia City refers to me as either the preservation Nazi or the history commissar, depending on which newspaper you read and which political philosophy you ascribe to. So my main job is as an architectural historian, running around telling everybody what color to paint their buildings, and no, you shouldn't tear that down, and yes, you should fix that, and no, you really don't want to put that Jersey barrier up on that road, even though they went ahead and did it anyway, but that's another story. So at any rate, how might you ask, is an architectural historian going to be either qualified or interested in talking about something like the McKean car? Well, in addition to doing architectural history, I've also been involved in railroad transportation history for quite a long time. I did a lot of work on railroad history and context when I worked for the State Historical Society in South Dakota back in the day. So I came sort of prepared to deal with railroad resources, and when they told me that I was going to get a museum with a big locomotive in it, I said, oh, cool. So I encourage you all to come up. We're located at 20 North E Street, which is at the corner of E and Union, 2 easy blocks downhill from the Bucket of Blood, so you can stop off and have a Bloody Mary and then just roll down the hill, come look at our museum. So anyway, about 2 or 3 years ago, Ron James and Peter Barton and I were sort of sitting around trying to figure out how we might be able to get some money to continue the restoration of the McKean car that's currently going on in the shops here. And one of the things that we decided was that the artifact itself was probably eligible to be listed as a National Historic Landmark. And having come up with the wacky idea, it fell to me to actually put the documentation together. So I plunged in to doing the research on our McKean car and getting that documentation put together, which basically means that it's done from the perspective of a historian. So I hope there aren't any bolt counters here tonight, because I couldn't tell you how many bolts are on this thing if you put a gun to my head. What I'm going to talk about is the reason why our McKean car and McKean cars in general are important in the national context of transportation, which is the case that you have to make to the powers that be in Washington, D.C. to get something made into a national landmark. So with that, we will segue straight into the presentation. I will try and juggle both the microphone and the zapper here, and we will head off in. And my first question is, can anybody tell me who that is? Pardon? Harriman. Close. Half a point. Half a point. That is Edward Harriman, who is the first major player and character in the discussion of the McKean car and why it is important to anybody at this point in the early 21st century. Harriman was a financier of formidable ability, born in New York City, started in the New York Stock Exchange as a runner at the tender age of 14, and by 1870 was a member of the New York Stock Exchange, and by the middle 1880s was involved in various and sundry extremely high finance. He developed early on a reputation for taking corporations that had really not done well and putting them on a profit-making basis. He was had a reputation in New York for really being able to turn companies around, and did it with several institutions in the 1880s and 1890s. The previous to the one that we're going to talk about, probably the most prominent was his resuscitation of the Illinois Central Railroad in the 1880s. In 1893, however, he took on what may very well have been his greatest challenge, which was the Union Pacific system. Union Pacific had been built and born under scandal, and undercapitalized, underfunded, and generally corrupt for quite a long time. You may remember from your railroad history that the whole Credit Mobilier scandal with the financing for the railroad, and accusations of public fraud, and robber barons, and the public be damned, and all that sort of stuff. Well, the Union Pacific had limped along in a pretty bad state into the 1890s, and then the panic hit in 1893, which was a major economic downturn and depression. And the Union Pacific went into receivership, bankruptcy, and stayed there for 5 years, which is a very, very long time for any significant corporation to remain in bankruptcy court. Most people had written the Union Pacific off by 1897, 1898. And most of the major railroad corporations in the country were sitting around waiting for the inevitable fire sale and looking to pick up bits and pieces of real estate and rolling stock and anything else that wasn't nailed down. Well, into the midst of all this comes Harriman, and Harriman decides that he's going to make a go of the Union Pacific. And so he comes in 1898, buys a majority stock position in the company, and begins to operate and examine every aspect of operations on the Union Pacific to try and turn the company around and put it into profit-making mode. He spent a lot of money on the line, did a lot of upgrading, and fortunately he did inherit some fairly talented people that were associated with the Union Pacific. And probably the most important of those people, in my opinion, was William Riley McKean Jr. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of McKean. I still am looking for one that's digitally available. So at this point, I would segue into a picture of McKean, but I'm going to segue into a picture of what McKean actually built instead. And McKean was in charge of the locomotive and car shops in Omaha, Nebraska, which was the main facility for Union Pacific for the whole system at the time that Harriman took over in 1898. McKean was from Terre Haute, Indiana. He was a trained engineer, had graduated from the Rose Institute, which is now the Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology in Terre Haute, and also had studied at the Charlottenburg Practicum in Germany. Very highly considered railroad engineer, and had grown up literally in the Terre Haute and Indianapolis shops because his father was the president of the line. So he had railroading really in his blood. And like I said, in 1898, when Harriman took over, McKean was working in the main shops in Omaha. And as part of Harriman's examination of operations, he very rapidly zeroed in on one of the major expense lines on the Union Pacific books, which was the need for lightly populated branch line passenger service. Now, in the 1890s, a passenger train required a steam locomotive and at least one passenger coach or car, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and at least a crew of 5 in order to be able to operate under union rules at that point. You needed a conductor, 2 brakemen, a fireman, and an engineer. And on lines out in the hinterlands of Nebraska, most of the passenger operations were losing money. And so what Harriman wanted to do was find a more economical way to operate and provide passenger service on lightly populated branch lines. And he was thinking, he basically put heads together with McKean and said, we need to find a technological fix for this problem. And what they came up with was this. This is motor car number 1, which was fabricated by McKean at the Union Pacific shops in Omaha in 1904-1905. It is the prototype for what later became the McKean motor car. What they did is they pretty much applied what they did is they created a gasoline-powered motor car that could operate independently without any support vehicles or anything else, with an operating crew of 2, thereby saving 3 salaries and operating at a much better rate of return than a steam train. And so this prototype was put out in 1905 by the Omaha shops, and immediately shipped all over the Harriman system. Harriman had been very successful in turning the Union Pacific around. He'd also acquired the Southern Pacific Railroad in 1901, and as a result controlled a huge railroad empire. And so this little motor car took off around the country in 1905 and was demonstrated to various operators and also to folks on the Harriman system, and eventually went into service in Nebraska. The results were that many such cars were produced and put into service on Union Pacific and Southern Pacific branch lines around the West. the reception from Harriman and from the operators of his system were such that they actually spun off a company to build and construct motor cars. And I think it was the first 6 or 7 that were actually built by Union Pacific. And then the McKean Motor Car Company was established, and I believe that was 1906, to manufacture these motor cars, which would then be sold to not only Harriman system, but other railroads around the country, and even in one case to a railroad in Australia. They went into production in 1906 and produced, I haven't seen a firm figure yet, but I think total, depending on how you count, about 250 cars between 1906 and 1920. And this is a mock-up of their basic model. You can see that it's a self-contained unit right here, the engine right behind the motorman, baggage and express compartment here, smoking carriage, center entry right here, toilets, non-smoking compartment here, and the characteristic rounded back end and bench seat there. As they went into production, there were several things about the McKean that were quite unique. There had been experimentation with using internal combustion engines previous to the turn of the century, but they had none of them ever gotten beyond the experimental stage in any real sense. This car was the first real application of internal combustion to rail transportation. And that's one of the reasons why they were such a significant advance in moving railroad transportation forward from steam locomotion. You can also see that it has this odd shape to it with the arched top and the smooth sides. And when we see some more photographs of it, you'll be able to see that it's got a steel skin on it. And the other really, really amazing innovation is this in the way it's constructed. It is what you call a stressed arch construction, steel arch construction. Most steel cars up until this point had been very heavy, very over-engineered. In order to save on weight and be able to make a 200 horsepower engine work to move a 70 passenger vehicle up and down the line, they had to basically come up with a light frame that was both sturdy but didn't drag the car down. And so as a result, they built this series of arched steel trusses along the body, which connected over the top, and then put a steel skin over it. And the porthole windows were a result of X-shaped reinforcing between the arches. So the arches would go like this, and there'd be one between this window, one between this window. You'd have X frames here to provide support. So you couldn't put a square window. Now you'll notice that the first prototype had regular ordinary windows in it. Well, that's because it was made of wood. This was a technology that came along after they started the initial prototype. So that's the second sort of technological innovation that this beast managed to incorporate. And the third is aerodynamic or streamline design. Now, as it turns out, the streamlining on this was exactly backwards, and it would have been much more efficient if you'd have run it this end first. But they didn't really know much about aerodynamics and streamlining in 1905, but they did come up with statistics based on some tests that were done in Germany at the turn of the century to show that a pointed prow would provide some increase in efficiency. And Harriman was such a nut for efficiency that he said, let's do it. So they put this pointy nose and rounded end on the thing in order to be able to get a little bit more operating efficiency out of the actual car. So this is the end result. This is a 70-foot. This is the 70-foot model. Now this is ours. This is the V&T engine. This was the 70th production model that came off the line in Omaha. It was ordered in late 1909 and delivered to the V&T in 1910. The Mills family that owned or had a significant part of the V&T at the turn of the century also owned a line up in Washington, in Bellingham, and they had operated one of these cars on that line in Bellingham. So Mills was familiar with the idea of a motor car. and had broached the idea to Henry Yarrington of buying a motor car in order to supplement traffic on their brand new branch line to Minden. The Minden branch, as you may recall, had been completed in the mid-1900s. An expanded line from Carson to Minden had been built in order to enhance the profitability of the V&T, which had just sold off its line going down to Tonopah just before there'd been a big gold strike in Tonopah, and so they weren't making any money on that once the Hazen cutoff was finished. This was their new operation, and in order to be able to run supplemental service, they did have a regular passenger service, a traditional steam locomotive service to Minden, but in order to supplement that service on a daily basis and also to provide for overflow for specials and things like that, the V&T management decided that McKean car would be just the ticket for operating. And it's possible to operate on this part of the V&T because of the relatively flat grades and the lack of significant curvature on the route between Carson City and Minden. So at any rate, an order was put in late 1909, and this 70-foot model, number 70, off the line, was delivered to the Virginian Truckee in 1910. As part of the purchase, a fellow by the name of Ed Peterson, who was the head mechanic for the V&T, was dispatched back to Omaha, and he spent a month learning how to operate this vehicle because it was substantially unlike anything that anybody who was in the railroading business had ever seen before. Obviously, he had to learn all the ins and outs of maintaining an internal combustion engine. He had to learn how to work with a fairly primitive mechanical transmission, which turned out to be the Achilles heel of these vehicles, and also had to learn the ins and outs of operating over distance, and even had to learn about an acetylene-powered lighting system, which was part of the original equipment on this vehicle. So at any rate, Peterson went back to Omaha and brought this vehicle out to Nevada in May of 1910, and it started in on regular service. This is a photograph taken at the Minden Depot on the first day of service in June of 1910. I think with a little diligence, we could probably identify who some of the people were milling around the car. But at any rate, this is what it looked like when it first went into service on the V&T. It quickly became known as the Red Dragon because it was such a strange, alien-looking device, and because it was painted a nice dark red with gold leaf trim on it. It was also assigned the number 22, motor car number 22, by the Virginian Truckee. So that's where we get the multiple numbers. Number 70 was the car body number out of McKean. The number 22 was its operating number on the V&T roster. So the McKean basically went into regular revenue service in 1910 and continued on into the 1920s, providing secondary service and overflow service on the Minden branch line. It evolved a bit over time. The acetylene light system was taken out. Various and sundry spotlights and running lights were put on. You can see very large additional light put on the top. You can see that somebody's affixed a bell to the top in this photograph. This was taken in Reno, and I believe this is before it was converted into an RPO, but you know, you couldn't get me to swear to it on a stack of Bibles. At any rate, it operated in its original configuration capacity pretty much through the 1920s, and then by 1929, with the advent of the Great Depression, demand for V&T passenger service really had begun to fall off due to economic downturn and also increased quality of roads and competition from road transportation, particularly automobiles. So it was laid up in 1929 and then put on standby status while the V&T management tried to get permission from the U.S. Postal Service to turn it into a railway post office. And that took quite a lot of finagling because, of course, it didn't meet any of the usual federal standards for a railway post office, but fortunately the Mills family still had a few connections in Washington, D.C., and Walter Folger Brown, who was the Postmaster General under Franklin Roosevelt, was prevailed upon, and it was converted into a railway post office and operated in that capacity with also limited passenger space into the 1930s. Now, it was of course, constantly under the gun because operations on the V&T were quite marginal in the 1930s, and as you may recall, the branch line to Virginia City was closed down and finally abandoned in 1938. Here you can see it where it's been converted into the RPO, and again, various modifications have been made to the deal. This was taken approximately 1940, I think. It was constantly under threat of being retired, and the only thing that really saved it was the advent of the Second World War, because once that happened, there was no alternative but to keep operating it. So it did operate through until 1945, when it was finally retired. Now, this is a photograph of the M10,000. And the M10,000 was produced by Union Pacific in the early 1930s and went into revenue service in 1934. This is the sort of the next generation successor to the McKean car. Again, produced by Union Pacific in their shops, internal combustion engine, in this case diesel rather than gasoline, with a much more efficient transmission system. But still, the basic idea of using internal combustion was refined and put into this vehicle. Streamlining design and lightweight stressed arch steel construction, all of which were pioneered by McKean, premiered in this vehicle in the early 1930s, and along with the Burlington Zephyr, these were the two sort of iconic early streamliners. So what I like to point out, and what I did point out in the National Landmark nomination, was that McKean was essentially 30 years ahead of his time in working with these various approaches to railroad transportation. And as a result, if you look at the history of railroad transportation later on, from the 1930s onward, you see the transition to internal combustion, you see the transition to lightweight steel construction, and you see the transition to streamlined design beginning in the 1930s. So he really was a pioneer in looking at these various aspects of railroad transportation and technology. And that's the real significance of the McKean car. It is very definitely a precursor to major trends in rail transportation in the 20th century. Now, you may ask what happened to the McKean car after it was retired. And in fact, maybe we can even go back and talk about what happened to the McKean Company before we talk about what happened to the McKean car. The McKean Company was dissolved in 1920. Demand for McKean cars really fell off in the middle 19-teens, 1915, 1916. Again, as a result of some of the forces that really impacted the railroad business in general, the dominance of the automobile in the 20th century for transportation, and the continued difficulty in manipulating the mechanical transmission on the McKean cars were both problems that really caused demand to fall off beginning in about 1915. Then along comes the First World War, 1917, and really no new manufacturer of rail passenger equipment is undertaken. And so in 1920, the company was dissolved. William R. McKean made a nice little profit and retired to an avocado ranch in Montecito, California, where he lived very comfortably until he died in 1946. And you can see that this again is from about 2 years ago when we submitted the documentation. And you can see that the car body has been repaired, and the basic integrity has been put back together. The portholes have been refurbished and redone. Here's a shot of it from the rear. These are some interior photographs, and you can see that the interior finishes have really been very nicely redone. This was had just recently been put in. This is the big semicircular bench seat at the rear, and you can see the porthole design and how they flip up at the top and hook onto the ceiling to be open during operation.